At the peak of his powers, almost everyone in the world knew the name Michael Schumacher. He broke just about every record there was and left a legacy spanning almost 2 decades. But underneath all that, he was one of the most hated drivers in the sport's history. So what exactly did he do? Stay tuned as we dive into the checkered past of Michael Schumacher. First up, getting in his way. If you ask Formula One fans about Schumacher's most controversial moments, they'll usually point to 1994 or 1997. We'll get into those incidents later in the video. But let's start with a controversy earlier in his career. In fact, it was so early in his career that he wasn't even in Formula One yet. It was 1991 at the iconic Nürburgring circuit in Germany and was part of the World Sport Car Championship. A 22-year-old Schumacher was 1 week away from his first F1 race, and so he had everything still to prove. It was one qualifying for the race, but Schumacher identified an enemy. Jaguar driver Derek Warwick slowed Schumacher down while he was on a flying lap. The German didn't take kindly to that and decided to exact some revenge. Schumacher shunted the side of Warwick's car, damaging the front wing and wheel. As you can imagine, Warwick was pretty angry. He apparently chased Schumacher once they got out of their cars, and the two had to be split up because Warwick was ready to throw a swing. Schumacher hadn't even driven in Formula One yet and had already earned himself a reputation for a lack of sportsmanship. There was no denying that his driving was world class, but already in 1991, it was clear that he wouldn't be making any friends in the paddock. Most people associated Schumacher with Ferrari, but that's definitely not where he started. His early years in the sport featured a controversial contract dispute, which revealed his determination to win at all costs. After years of success in karting, Schumacher hit the junior categories of racing in the late 80s. Just like all aspiring drivers in Europe, it didn't take long for him to pick up some trophies, including Formula Koenig, Formula 3, and Macau Grand Prix titles. But in 1991, he was shaping up to be an attractive investment for Formula One teams. Long before Lewis Hamilton or George Russell, Schumacher joined the Mercedes Junior Racing program and competed in Formula 3000 and the World Sports Car Championship. But as Mercedes weren't competing in F1 at the time, the young German ended up at a newly found Team Jordan, where he made his debut at the 1991 Belgian Grand Prix. Mercedes paid the team $150,000 for him to replace outgoing driver Bertrand Gachot for the race. He impressed the team with blistering speed and qualified P7, much higher than Jordan were used to. After that performance, the team was eager to sign him. They came to an agreement, but then he dramatically broke ties to join rival Benetton. Jordan felt cheated and even took Schumacher to court. Unfortunately for him, the judge ruled that because Schumacher hadn't signed a final contract, he was free to leave. After just one race in F1, he had already burnt a bridge. But it turned out to be a great decision because with Benetton, he won his first 2 championships in 1994 and 1995, but not without controversy. And the first one is the sweetest. 1994 was Schumacher's 3rd full year in Formula One, and he was ready to compete for the title. In 1992, he finished 3rd place in the Drivers' Championship, and the next year brought more of the same. But in 1994, they upgraded their Ford engine, which was a game changer. Schumacher won 6 out of the first 7 races and built up a healthy 37-point lead over Williams' driver Damon Hill. The second half of the season wasn't so smooth though. At the British Grand Prix, Schumacher was disqualified for failing to serve a stop-and-go penalty in time. And that wasn't all. He was also banned from 2 races. If it weren't for those penalties, he would have surely been further ahead come the final race. Instead, Schumacher went to the Australian Grand Prix just 1 point ahead of Hill. It was an all-or-nothing moment for the German, and his first title was within touching distance. Schumacher was leading the race at the halfway point, but Hill was gaining on him faster and faster. On lap 36, Schumacher lost control and went off the track before clipping the wall and rejoining the course. Then, as Hill passed him on the next corner, he turned into his rival sharply, ending both their races and winning himself the 1994 World Championship. It remains one of the most controversial moments in F1 history. Hill took some responsibility for not waiting longer to overtake Schumacher, but most fans agree that the German knew exactly what he was doing. Up next, how many times has Schumacher deliberately crashed to try and win? And why did former drivers call for him to retire during the 2006 season? So don't go anywhere. Next, history repeats itself. Schumi may have scraped a victory in 1994, but 1995 was child's play for the ruthless German. His next world championship came in 1997 after he had moved to Ferrari, and once again, it ended under very controversial circumstances. Throughout the season, Schumacher had his work cut out for him against another Williams driver, this time the Canadian Jacques Villeneuve. The two traded wins throughout the season, and by the final round, Schumacher was a whisker ahead in the standings. The stage was Jerez in Spain for the European Grand Prix. Qualifying was worthy of a championship decider. Schumacher, Villeneuve, and his teammate Frentzen all posted exactly the same time, down to the thousandths. Because Villeneuve had set his time first, he would start ahead of Schumacher. Just like he did to Damon Hill 3 years earlier, Schumacher took the lead at the start of the race, but it wasn't the only thing that would repeat itself. On lap 48, Villeneuve looked to be overtaking Schumacher comfortably before the Ferrari turned sharply into the side pod of Villeneuve. Martin Bundle, who was commentating at the time, famously said, "That didn't work, Michael. You hit the wrong part of him, my friend." The collision slowed Villeneuve down, but he still finished in 3rd place, which was enough to clinch the championship after Schumacher was forced to retire. On top of that, Schumacher was disqualified by the FIA from the entire season. It kind of made sense, but why didn't they do the same in 1994? And now, 2002 team orders. Team orders. Probably the most universally disliked part of Formula One. No fan likes to see a drive move aside of their teammate to scoop up easy points. It might be a good strategy for the team, but it doesn't feel like racing. That's why Schumacher was booed by the entire crowd during a podium celebration in 2002. It was the height of Ferrari's dominance in the sport. Schumacher had a dream team of Jean Todt, Ross Brawn, Rory Byrne, and Stefano Domenicali around him. It was a well-oiled machine, and part of the mechanics was managing the drivers. At the Australian Grand Prix, Ferrari was cruising home to a 1-2 finish. Schumacher was 21 points ahead of his brother Ralf Schumacher, but it seems that wasn't enough for Ferrari. Schumacher's teammate Rubens Barrichello was leading the race before team principal Jean Todt instructed him to give up his lead for the sake of Schumacher's championship hopes. After some arguing, Todt threatened to fire Barrichello if he didn't obey. Without any options, he gave up the lead at the last second for his teammate. Even Schumacher felt bad about it. During the podium celebrations, he put Barrichello on the top step and even gave him the winner's trophy. The crowd booed and the FIA responded. They fined Schumacher and Barrichello $1 million each for not following the podium rules and went ahead with banning team orders for the next season. Talk about having an impact on the sport. Next, 2006 Monaco Grand Prix. By 2006, Michael had it all. He had racked up a record 7 world championships, became one of the highest paid athletes in the world, and almost single-handedly brought Formula One back into popular culture. But it seems even that wasn't enough. Renault driver Fernando Alonso won 2 out of the first 3 races, and by the Monaco Grand Prix, he was 15 points clear of Schumacher. Alonso had already won his first championship the year before, and Schumacher could see where things were headed. In the final session of qualifying in Monte Carlo, both contenders were completing their last lap. Schumacher had already posted provisional pole, but on his second attempt, Alonso was behind him running much faster. As Schumacher turned the Raskus corner, he made an unbelievable understeer and had to completely stop to avoid hitting the barriers. That mistake sabotaged Alonso's lap and handed pole position to Schumacher. But it didn't last long. The FIA quickly concluded that the action was deliberate and he was sent to the back of the grid as punishment. Former world champion Keke Rosberg called for Schumacher to retire and described it as the cheapest, dirtiest thing he had ever seen in the sport. Of course, Schumacher defended himself, as did Ferrari, but even Schumi fans agree that it's unlikely the master driver lost control in such a slow corner. He lost the season to Alonso and retired from the sport until returning briefly in 2010. Maybe he was waiting for people to forget. Which incident do you think was most damaging for Schumacher? And do you think they impact his legacy? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again in the next one.